Hey, Craig here from GTconsult. It's a bit of a chilly day here in Cape Town, all dressed up warmly for winter, which is firmly on its way. But we thought we'd warm you up with a little bit of AutoGPT. So many of you have heard of AutoGPT. A lot of you haven't gotten to play with it because, well, you kind of need to be a developer to set it up. So I'm going to go through that process with you, show you some of the pitfalls, and also explain to you where this is a benefit over ChatGPT as an example. So you all start off by going to the significant gravitas site on GitHub. And that stores all of the code for AutoGPT. And I said this is a bit techy. So whilst you're playing with it, there are a couple of configurations that you need to do in the back-end code. The nice thing, though, is they've documented this really well. And they've got a video of the demos. They've also got an installation instruction, as well as instructions for any of the requirements, like getting the latest releases, getting an API key. So when you click through on the installation instructions, it goes through everything from whether you're running this in VS Code to whether you're running it in Docker. The idea behind the platform, though, is that it improves on ChatGPT and GPT-4 by allowing access into the internet so that it gets the latest data and can think for itself, can instruct itself to perform tasks. So the first thing you'd go through is the setup here. I'm not actually going to go through that because it's actually really well documented. I haven't set up the Docker version. I'm running the VS Code version, but it gives you all of the instructions here of what you need to configure and also how to run it. So let's have a quick look at configuration, and then we'll actually see the tool running. Okay, so jumping into the configuration, there are two files that you need to basically configure. The first is the .env file, which is actually named incorrectly. You need to go and rename it in your instance. But the configuration is actually pretty simple. You put in your Open API key. Now, that could be your Open API key from OpenAI, the site, or alternatively, if you've set up your own Azure instance, you can put in your Azure OpenAI key in here as well. If you're using Azure, you need to set this to true, and that's where this brings in this Azure YAML file that you'll also need to go and configure. Now, a couple of other things. Setting up your models. Now, in our version of OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, we only have GPT 3.5 Turbo. We're waiting still for the acceptance into the GPT 4 preview. So we're running this off of 3.5 Turbo at the moment. You can also decide in terms of memory where you store memory, because the application itself stores the memory of what it's doing. It logs everything that it's doing. And you can either do that locally on your own machine, or you can push this to a virtual server, something like Pinecone. So we've set this up with Pinecone, but at the moment I'm just running it off of our local machine. The final and one of the best things to do here is go to 11 Labs, get yourself an API key, because then you can add voice to your AutoGPT, and that just adds another dimension. Really cool for demos, but even when you're utilizing it, to understand exactly what it's doing. So the second file we have to do is our Azure YAML file. Now, this is set up to tell the solution where your OpenAI service sits, and you'll get your name from that service. If you have a look at how we set up Azure OpenAI, we've got that in our one of our previous videos. You get your name from Azure itself, put in your URL, and then you can utilize your Azure OpenAI version. With that, it tells you what version you're running of the OpenAI service, and you can also tell it what solutions you're using, what models you're using for providing the ChatGPT 3.5, ChatGPT 4, as well as your ADA modeling, which provides imagery for any of your solutions. So the first two are for chat completion. The other one is more for bringing in images. Okay, so that's basically your configuration. Let's get into the more exciting part. Let's get into actually playing with the tool. Okay, so to get this running, we are going to open up the terminal. Now, for you non-techie people, this might look a little bit scary. There is no front end for AutoGPT at this point in time. This is new development. You run it using commands. So I've got a command to run it that is simply run.bat. Now that opens up and starts running, but I want to add in a little bit of pizzazz. We want to get this to talk to us and show you some of the cool features. So what we've got is the ability to run this using a Python script where I can ask it to speak. So let's kick that off and see what it does. With that Python code, not a lot that you need to know. Obviously, I showed you the configuration.
Welcome back. Would you like me to return to being GTconsult autocoder?
So as you can see, it's speaking to me. It's also using the memory from my machine to pick up where it left off. But I want to start from scratch to show you how this works. So I'm going to go with no.
Welcome to AutoGPT. Run with help for more information. Create an AI assistant. Enter the name of your AI and its role below. Entering nothing will load defaults.
Okay, so it's telling me what I need to do to set it up. So I'm going to give it a name, and we will call this GTconsult Autocoder.
GTconsult autocoder here. I am at your service.
Okay, so the first thing that I need to do is describe what this AI bot is going to do. And it gives you an example here, but for my instance, I have something predefined that I would like an AI platform to generate a platformer game using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There should be two characters named Calvin and Kalia, and their objective should be to rescue an AI developer captured by the evil mastermind Kim, who is the ultimate boss. Really hoping that my wife doesn't see this video. I now need to give it a number of goals. Now, it's important to know that the more descriptive you are with your suggestion of how this should be helping you, and the goals that you give it will help the solution perform in a better manner. So in mine, I'm going to generate an HTML platformer game, and I'm only going to give it two goals, that being the first one. The second one would be to test the game. Once you've run out of your goals, you have up to 5. You can just press enter and off it runs. Whilst it's thinking, it's doing an OpenAI call to identify exactly what it needs to do. So not touching here, the solution is actually working by itself now.
I will start by generating the HTML platformer game. I will create a canvas element and add the characters and obstacles to it. I will also add event listeners to handle user input and update the game state. I want to execute do_nothing.
Okay, so it now asks for an input. So you might be going, well, how is this thing thinking for itself then? Well, the input actually helps you to control this to some degree. I've got the ability to type in a yes to move on to the next step, or I could provide my own feedback, which might contradict what it has thought. So it will take that into cognizance when it decides on its next step. Now, it can get a little bit painful clicking yes all the time. So you can move this into a more continuous mode. Now, you can run it in a fully continuous mode. That can be a little bit dangerous because obviously every call has a cost involved in it, and this can get caught in a loop. So the solution itself, in terms of my experience with it, a lot of the services I've tried to run, it never actually comes to an end. So running it in that continuous mode can be problematic. Whereas if you're putting in inputs, you can then direct it on what it should be doing next, or prompt it with what you believe it should be doing. So if I type in yes, it will go off and think about its next command that it needs to do. It's making that call once again to OpenAI, figuring out what it needs to do in terms of generating that canvas.
I will now generate the HTML platformer game. I will start by creating a canvas element and adding the characters and obstacles to it. I will also add event listeners to handle user input and update the game state. I want to execute write underscore to underscore file.
Okay, so if I'm happy now with all of this information and how it's going, I could probably click Y hyphen 10. Then it's going to run the next 10 commands without me actually putting in input. It's just going to tell itself what to do. So that's the power here. I can also just get out of this by clicking on N, and it exits the program and leaves it there. But hopefully that gives you a good idea of how this thinks for itself, how it is working with the data that I provided. The more important part, though, is that it can tell itself to go and do research on behalf of the application. So it can go into Google, find information from Google, and get the latest up-to-date information. So when it runs into a step that it doesn't know, it can go and research it for itself. Now, this automatically generates code on your machine. It puts it all into a workspace, so it's all contained. So it reduces that kind of security. So the problems that we've run into. Well, as I mentioned, I'm yet to run a very successful bot with a more intricate type of data. So I've done things like looking at the financial markets and understanding trends, and it gets stuck in analyzing trends and figuring out what the best trend processes are. Or the best analysis tools to use to analyze trends, or for instance, building some solutions for SharePoint, where I've given it some instructions on what to do, and it gets stuck on certain instructions, which you need to step in and help it out to get it moving on. So those are some of the problems, but this is in its infancy. It's been running for about a month. It is not a tool that is fully developed. It's in no state in any production ready code, but it's an important insight into where we're going to. It also helps you understand why people are saying that developers' jobs might be obsolete in about 3 years' time. Well, whether they are or not is another question, because understanding the requirements and how to translate those so that the tool can actually build what you want does require some development knowledge, or at least some business analysis knowledge, as well as the ability to look at the code once it's been generated and make applicable changes, which, yes, the tool can do as well, but it's also one of those things that it helps to have some background in development to understand that. Hopefully, this gives you an insight into AutoGPT. We'll be touching on other uses of AI, including looking at the Microsoft Copilot AI. Brad just spent some time in Vegas looking at all of the launches of that. So we're very excited with these movements in terms of the in terms of the environments. So yeah. Otherwise, if you go onto GT Consult site, you'll find some more information about the tool sets that we offer. Thanks.